The ACC just made a major change to its revenue model, rewarding teams like Clemson with more money. But what does that mean for Clemson staying in the conference, and should they? That's all coming up right now on Locked On Clemson.
You are Locked On Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Tiger fans? Morgan Thomas here, Clemson fan, Clemson grad, host and producer of Locked On Clemson, and part-time host and producer over on 105.5 and 97.5 The Roar, Clemson's flagship station. Thank you so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're new to the show, be sure to hit that like and subscribe and notification bell over on YouTube or podcast wherever you listen to this episode so that you can never miss a show. That's right. On Locked On, you know how it goes. We talk Clemson football Monday through Friday for 30 minutes a day, every day during the week. So exclusive Clemson content. Don't forget to follow me over on X as well at The Morgan T Show, where you can reach out to me and talk to me in between shows. Coming up on today's show, is the ACC actually closing the gap to the SEC and the Big Ten, and is it enough for Clemson to stay in the conference? What is so important about 2030, and could it be Clemson's year to finally leave the conference? How would a Super League impact Clemson's future, and much, much more? Latest news suggests that Clemson and Florida State may actually not be leaving the ACC anytime soon. The new revenue sharing model could give high viewership teams like the Tigers a significant financial boost, potentially adding $10 to $15 million more per year to their payouts. Now, when we think about this, remember that originally it was all shared between all of the teams in the conference, and that's the way that the other ones are set up as well. The other conferences have it set up to where everybody gets an equal portion of the revenue share. Now, that's not necessarily fair because some of these teams don't invest into their programs like football as much as they should or could. And so they're not having the same kind of success as Clemson and Florida State has had. And they're also not getting the same amount of viewership or ratings on television and in the media as Clemson and Florida State. So what has changed now is that the ACC, after these lawsuits came out, the ACC came back and said, you know what we're going to do is we're going to do a revenue sharing model that rewards top programs like Clemson and Florida State to get a larger cut of the media money based on their viewership and their ratings and performance. So this new revenue model is something along the lines of 40% is shared equally amongst all ACC teams in the conference. But then there's another 60% that's left over that's going to be distributed in this new revenue model that's going to give a larger cut to teams that make more money in media in viewership or have higher viewership ratings, make more money in television and media. So Clemson and Florida State, maybe even the Tar Heels and Miami and Duke are going to be able to bring in more money for themselves because they have higher viewership numbers in their respective programs. I think this model works. I've always said it's still just a Band-Aid, but I think it's something that shows that Clemson and Florida State have some leverage and that there is some respect and understanding that they are teams that bring more to the table than the rest. Now, one bad thing is, I guess you could say, the ACC still has their grant of rights, which, man, how crazy has it been to understand more about this grant of rights, but still runs through 2036. So Clemson's TV rights will remain tied to the league unless they find some way to get out of it. But one thing we're finding out is that there's not this buyout that we originally thought. The buyout number was around $300 to $500 million if you talk to some people, because it was two together. It was the buyout to get out of the conference, but then there was also the grant of rights buyout to maintain your TV rights, which if you don't have your TV rights, well, either you're not going to be able to play on television if you're not in that conference, if they don't allow you to, or anytime you're playing on television, that money is going to go to the conference of the ACC and not the conference that you move to. So it really kind of undercuts you being able to make any money when you leave the conference unless you made this huge buyout, which was really not worth it. So the ACC did really well to protect itself from teams leaving, but it really didn't do well to keep themselves in a competitive environment with other conferences, considering the contract was so long. Now, all of this could have been avoided if they didn't sign such a long contract out. But because they did that, it allowed other teams to go in between their time and get better contracts. So that's when it put Clemson and Florida State and other teams behind the eight ball there and behind their rivals. And you don't want to be behind the rivals. I've told you this many times. Maybe $5 million a year behind is not too bad, but over year, it really adds up, and your rivals are going to have a huge advantage in facilities, in coaching contracts, in media rights, and in player deals, depending on how you look at that. So one thing that we found out is that the grant of rights is there, but instead of an unknown figure, they're starting to put together a clear financial penalty for leaving. And it's going to not be two penalties together. It's going to be one combined, and it's going to be less than what we thought. Plus, it decreases over time. So you're looking at maybe a $200 million buyout now that's going to be good for your TV rights and to get out of the conference. But also that goes down over time. Now, I don't know exactly how much it's going to go down over time, but that is one good thing, because when something gets less and less over time, then the closer you get to the end of the contract, you can kind of speed things up so you're not stuck to that 2036. So while 2036 is definitely still a very real number and very real date for Clemson and other teams in the ACC, they can start to kind of entertain the idea of buying out when you have a number that's more manageable, right? And the number could be more manageable too, because the financial boost that they're going to get from this adjusted revenue sharing model is going to be great. Clemson's going to be able to see 10 to 15 to 20, maybe even $50 million more than they thought they were going to get in the past if everything was shared equally. Still, in many ways, trailing the SEC and the Big Ten, but much better than before. So the gap, while it could still be there or may still be there, it's not going to be as high or as large as you once had to deal with. So you can kind of be okay with waiting maybe, say, 5 more years. 2030 is a big date, and we'll get into this a little more, but 2030 is a big date because it's a year for realignment for many other conferences as well. Major TV deals are going to be expiring around this time, and the college football playoff could be wanting to expand even further. We know that they're already talking about 2026, but I could see them talking about it in 2030 as these TV deals are coming up, and they're going to be looking at expanding, because it's not just about, hey, what we did in the past that demands more money, but also it's about, hey, we're going to bring more teams to the table, like Clemson and Florida State, for example, and we're going to be able to demand more money in our TV rights deals because of that. So one good thing out of all of this, and the one takeaway that I want you to think of, is that Clemson forced ACC's hand. They made them change to a revenue sharing model that allowed the better teams that had better revenue, but had better viewership and better ratings to benefit financially more than other teams. And I think that this is the best way to run a conference. Honestly, the ACC finally did something that made the most sense. Now, while the money and the main contract is still not as high as the others, so it doesn't seem as good on the outside, I think in the short term, it's the right thing to do. And maybe even in the long term, it'll be the way that all of them are set up. While the Tigers aren't leaving the ACC just yet, they are definitely in a stronger position than they were before. And that's because with this lawsuit, while it didn't go all the way down to the end, and now they've worked it out, they've made good, and the board of trustees are all together today to work it out. They forced the ACC to publicly acknowledge that Clemson is a top dog in the conference, and they have value that can demand change. And that is key, not only for Clemson, but that's key for Clemson in the ACC, and that's key for Clemson in future negotiations down the road with other conferences. All right, coming up next, could 2030 be the year for Clemson to finally leave the ACC? We'll talk about it. Get the supplies you need from the site that's made for skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to purchase products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, With a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support with industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros, there's an extra edge. For free, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Clemson and Florida State aren't leaving today. They aren't leaving this year, and I don't think they'll be leaving next year either. But it's 2030, the year that Clemson leaves the ACC. That date is looming as a potential turning point for realignment. TV deals on the national scale will begin to reset and come due. The SEC and the Big Ten will start to renegotiate their massive contracts that they already have. And with renegotiation, what have we found? The way to get even more leverage and even more money is to have the highest value schools out there. And maybe they get rid of some schools. I don't know. We'll talk about that too. But possibly adding in new schools, giving expansion an opportunity will be great for Clemson and Florida State or any other team that's looking to leave the ACC. As I mentioned, it wasn't realistic for Clemson to leave immediately because the other conferences that they could possibly go to either weren't as good or had already shored up everything and were kind of locked in for the foreseeable future. But 2030, that's when things change, and we could see more opportunities for these big conferences to add more teams. And Clemson could be in a position of leverage because of what we talked about in the last segment. They've shown that they have the value to create change and to force change and to force the conference hand. Now, will they have the same amount of value in the SEC and the Big Ten? No, but they definitely have shown that they deserve a look and deserve to be a valued member of the best conferences that are in the country. Now, this could help form a super league in 2030, which I've said I've wanted. I would like to see a big, giant super league of teams across the country. And I would like to see a huge barrier to entry to get into this super league. I only want teams that are really committed into investing in their football programs and basketball programs in this super league, because I think that right now we have conferences that have a bunch of teams that really aren't dedicated into growing their programs or being an elite program or even being a competitive program, but they're making more money than Clemson. They're making more or the same amount of money as other bigger programs in the country. And I don't think that that's going to continue. I would like for that to end. I'd like for teams that aren't really super serious or aren't able to keep up to get out and not be a part of a super league. I think you should be able to buy into a big league, and then you should be able to maintain your success. I know I mentioned it before. I don't know if this will ever happen, but like the way that European soccer has relegation, if you're a consistent team that's in the bottom 10% of your conference year over year over year, hey, guess what? You're no longer getting a part of these massive TV contracts that we have. I'm sorry. You're not going to be mooching off of the better teams that are able to get these big contracts. You're out of here. And if you get rid of the low performing teams or the underperforming teams and replace them with better performing teams that are serious about growing their football programs and baseball and basketball programs, I think that will be better for you to be able to renegotiate when the time comes. So the only thing that I would say against a massive super league would be is if they still force you to travel all over the country. I don't like that college teams aren't playing teams in their regions as much as they are playing across the country. And I know schools have mentioned that they are frustrated with the travel costs that are out there. Geographic issues are real when it comes to college because they're not making as much money. And a lot of times they're either breaking even or they're losing some money in some of these situations. So Not only do I think that only the best need to survive in the Super League, but also if we're going to have that, I think they need to help make it better by having different regions where you play most of your games. I don't think teams like Stanford need to be traveling to play Clemson and vice versa. I do think that those teams need to be relatively stuck in there, or at least play in their geographic areas. And then when they get into the postseason, then they can move and play in other areas of the country. Another thing that is really big that I think not a lot of people are talking about is, where does Notre Dame stand in all of this? You know, if Clemson and Florida State do end up leaving the ACC in 2030 and getting into a bigger conference, the Notre Dame's not going to really want to stick around in the ACC, will they? I mean, there may still be an opportunity to have some good games in basketball, but football will effectively have their top two teams gutted, much like what you saw with the Big 12. Now, the Big 12 is still surviving, and they made moves to bring in some better teams, not maybe better teams, but at least some teams that could be competitive, and showed that they wanted to be competitive in football. But once Clemson and FSU leave, will Notre Dame be a team that wants to finally commit to one of the big conferences? I think if there's a Super League, they would have to. There's no way around it at that case. And I think Notre Dame needs to do that. They've shown that they want to defy the odds here and still be able to get into the playoffs. And we've got to stop allowing them a free at-large bid. I don't like it. I don't think it's fair all around. And Notre Dame has shown that they really can't show up when they need to when they get into the postseason. So Notre Dame's going to have to make a decision once Clemson and Florida State do as well. And they should be thinking about it, in my opinion, now. Now, the grant of rights is still the big player, but it will be more manageable in 2030. Now, think about it. Would you be able to make a move if it was $300 million? Probably not. But what if it was just $100 million? And what if over the past couple of years, you've been saving up some of that extra revenue money with the new model to be able to go down as a down payment towards that $100 million? That makes the departure a little bit more feasible for Clemson and other teams in the ACC if they can take advantage of it. So for me, I do think that the negotiation seems like on the surface a huge win for the ACC. And it could be a huge win for the ACC right now in 2025, 26, 27. Definitely, I could see the argument for it being a huge win for the ACC right now. But is it a huge win for the ACC in the long run? I think it's just a Band-Aid to help them get by, in my opinion. Clemson definitely isn't leaving the ACC, but to me, all signs are pointing to 2030 as a potential year of change, not only in the ACC, but the SEC, the Big Ten, and college football in general. Could there be a super conference? The Tigers are playing the long game, and I think that's the right way to go. You showed nationally that your voice demands to be heard. You showed in your conference that you are the big dog, and you deserve respect. Not only respect, but you deserve a little bit extra money. Securing that revenue now will keep the options available for Clemson in the future and will help stop the bleeding from their rivals. You don't want to get too far behind Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina for sure. You don't want to get too far behind financially until because then it adds up over time. And then you're looking back 10 years and thinking, wow, my rivals that I'm competing with for players are now just surpassing me to the point where there's no way it would take decades or more to return or recover from this. Coming up next, we're going to finish out the show talking about the SEC and the Big Ten and how they could be facing their own issues now that the ACC has come to an agreement. One reason Clemson fans have pushed for realignment is that the perception that the SEC and the Big Ten are really so far ahead of them financially. And it really is true. You know, I mean, if you look at it in just 1 year, you could say, oh, well, Morg, it's just $5 million this year. But as I mentioned, it adds up as you go. And if you get to 5 million and then 10 million and then 15 million, what happens over time after 10 years or 15 years? And we're looking at 11 years to 2036. What happens to that gap at that point? Those teams are going to be reinvesting that money into their facilities, into their uniforms, into their medical facilities, into their nutrition, into their athletic facilities, into their coaching staffs. They're going to have higher profile coaches being able to stay. They're going to have better assistant coaches than you are because of that money. And eventually, and ultimately, they're going to be able to have better players because of that revenue sharing portion is not going to hurt as much. So they're going to be able to spend money around more freely than you are. You're going to have to penny pinch in some places to keep up. And you're probably going to invest most, if not all of your money in players and try to keep up as much as you can with coaches, but then facilities might lack. So what are you going to do to keep up? That's where it kind of felt like the SEC and the Big Ten were getting out of hand when it comes to Clemson, and you couldn't keep pace. Now with the change in the revenue sharing model, that's not going to be as bad, and it's going to be able to get Clemson by for the next couple of years until they can make another decision in 2030, as we mentioned. But I got to tell you, I think that this kind of sparks the debate and maybe some, discord or some frustration from other conferences with those big teams, because you're looking at the ACC now and you see this model where they're acknowledging, and not only acknowledging that they have teams that are bringing more value to the table and more viewers and more eyeballs and more clicks, but you have other teams in the conference that are saying, hey, we can't really fight this. We need the money. We need to get the best we can get. And if that means that Clemson and Florida State get more money, then so be it. We just need to be a part of the conference. We don't want to be not a part of the conference. Why not? Would Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, why would those teams not be interested in that kind of scenario as well for them? Why wouldn't Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, why wouldn't those teams be interested in maybe cutting some of the fat out of their conference and allowing other teams to make less money, while the big teams that are putting the most money into it and building up the best programs possible, when you have teams that aren't obviously doing that? You don't want those teams to continue to compete with you financially, because maybe there could eventually be over time some money that's used in the right way or in an innovative way that helps bridge that gap and allows other teams that aren't historical powerhouses, like say Vanderbilt, to play on equal playing terms in football as Alabama. We just saw this year Vanderbilt can beat Alabama, so it is possible. But if you're on an equal financial playing field year over year, but you're a team that is obviously much more successful than all the rest, why would you want equal revenue distribution and equal pay across the teams in your conference? To me, you wouldn't want that. If the ACC can reward top brands, why should the SEC or the Big Ten sit around and pay everybody evenly? Could the Big Ten and the SEC split into tiers, kind of like what Clemson is doing or the ACC is doing? Could teams that are not as good historically or be able to bring as much viewers to the table, could they get that 40% and then 60% go to the rest? Hey, that would be able to even bridge the gap more from those top tier teams than they have right now. I could see a real situation where that happens. Why would you want to continue to handcuff Alabama at, say, we'll do a for example scenario with the numbers that are just guess numbers here. But why would Alabama sit around and say, you know what, 50 million's great. Everybody wants more money. That's what it's all about. That's what makes the world go around, as they say. Everybody wants more money. So if it's all about making more money, more revenue, more eyeballs, more clicks, why would you want to be okay with just sitting around and making 50 million like Kentucky makes 50, like Missouri makes 50, like Vanderbilt makes 50 mil, Mississippi State? Why would you want to keep making $50 million and make it equal with everybody else when those teams need to kind of know their role and take a back seat and let Alabama make 100 million while the other teams continue to make their 50? Or maybe the other teams make 40 or 30 while Alabama makes 100 and Georgia makes 100. I could see them making that argument as well. The ACC is doing it. It is happening. And it might be the best thing for them. If they can get a renegotiated deal that allows them to have the same amount of pay or get on the same renegotiation schedule as the SEC and the Big Ten, then maybe, just maybe, you're in a scenario where other teams get a little bit feeling like they're left out. Clemson made this move, and now the gap is not as bad. But how can the SEC make the gap worse again? Well, they can do so by adapting or adopting the same model that the ACC has. It's not exclusive to the ACC, so why couldn't the other teams do the same? I think they could. Top brands should and could push for a bigger cut. We could see a revenue divide, not just in the ACC, but something like this in the SEC as well. What if they renegotiate in 2030 where there is that gap? Then you're really thinking that Clemson needs to get out, because Clemson could take advantage of that because of the loyal fan base that they have. Imagine if the SEC and the Big Ten, not if, I think they will, imagine when they go to a revenue sharing model that rewards the better teams with better viewerships, better fan bases, better TV revenue numbers, and better clicks. I think Clemson would be a huge player to that. It could add to the negotiation for those conferences. So at that point, Clemson would really be able to jump out and go to the SEC. I think that would be the best place for them. But I also could see where there would be a bid for the Big Ten. The SEC knows that they could add Clemson and have even more historical rivalry matchups and huge games during the regular season. So the regular season games would be huge if Clemson was in the SEC. Every single game with an SEC opponent that is mid to top level is going to be an absolute sellout and a huge tailgating opportunity and a huge boom for the businesses in the area. And Clemson fans travel. So not just in Clemson, but in other teams or in other cities as well that Clemson travels to. Now, the Big Ten may not be able to say that. They may not be able to say that Clemson brings them as big of an advantage when it comes to regular season games and bringing sold out big high profile night games to Clemson or when Clemson travels. But the Big Ten does not have a Southern presence in their conference. Maybe they want to be able to get into that market, and it could be an opportunity for them to bid for Clemson as well. If I were the Clemson czar or the leader, I would say my number one choice is the SEC, and then the Big Ten is my number two choice. But we'll have to see how it all shakes out. I think once those big conferences get into their renegotiation, that is when you make your move. Whether it's make your move to the SEC and the SEC has an expanded conference and the Big Ten has an expanded conference, and those two teams compete for a larger college football presence, I think that would work out where you have two super leagues instead of one big super league. I could see that happening as well. Clemson's elite brand ensures that they are going to be a power now, and they are a power now, and they're going to be a power in the future, and that they have some leverage and the viewership numbers to back up their demands. The SEC and the Big Ten may have some battles ahead. They may not just be perfect in their little worlds. When they start renegotiating, they're going to need to start thinking about how they're going to reward the better programs differently, much like Clemson is being rewarded as well. And Clemson definitely is in a better position than they were yesterday. Today, definitely. All right. Well, let me know what you think. Hey, if you're following me, if you're listening over on podcast, go follow me over on X at the Morgan T Show. Also, if you're over on YouTube, make sure you get in the comments. I love to chat back and forth with you. It is really awesome. Every single week, it's so fun to be a part of Locked On Clemson. Thank you so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen today. Make sure your second listen is Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Schad and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March to be the most informed college basketball fan now. Well, it is already March. So don't wait for March Madness tournament to finally catch up and to get your brackets right. You can know everything right now. Follow Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for being a part of the show. We'll see you tomorrow. And as always, Tiger fans, we'll see you at the top of the hill.